The reality is most of us need a whole lot less than we think we do in order to live that life, right? So number one, I think is focusing on what are the things that I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? What brings me joy? What brings me fulfillment? What actually matters to me? And typically that's focusing on our families, right? Having time to move our bodies and exercise and go on adventures and do the things that bring us joy. And then beyond that, there is this drive, and I think this is what you're hinting at, right? There's this never enough story that is deeply woven into our society that unless we stop and go back to first principles and actually ask the question, what is it that I want? We're just going to accept someone else's default.
Mike Brown, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, the last time we met was in your beautiful home in Colorado, which is where I think you're sitting this morning. And I was there with a small group of entrepreneurs, and we spent the entire morning speaking about wealth. And this conversation today is going to be about wealth, but I'm hoping by the end of this podcast, people will have redefined to some degree what wealth is. But let me start off with this question: how does a former Navy pilot, which I think you were, end up teaching founders, CEOs about wealth?
Well, it's a great question. It's very much born of my own journey. So I got out of the Navy in 2012. I started a company, and my mentor at the time told me it was the best time in the history of my industry to be in that industry. And he was right. A rising tide lifts all boats. The company was wildly successful, both because I made really good decisions and because a rising tide lifts all boats. And we were in the middle of the gold rush. And I sold that company in 2019. And really, that's where my journey begins. I did everything that society would tell me would make me happy. I built the business. I had the house. I had the cars. I had all the stuff. And I had all the accomplishments that are supposed to, be the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And I woke up and I was still the same person. And, sort of triggered an existential crisis of like, oh no, if this didn't do the thing it was supposed to do, then what will? And in that path of uncovering, I was continuing to invest. I was continuing to do the thing that had made me wealthy in the first place from a financial perspective. I was going all in. I was writing a lot of checks into investments, and I was deploying my capital as fast as it could come in. And I eventually bought a failing e-commerce company, hoping that I would be able to turn it around and sell it for 3 to 5 times what I paid. And it was an absolute disaster. I started losing $100,000 a month as soon as I closed. The walls started closing in, and 2 years after I had this life-changing exit, I was waking up. Some days I didn't even want to get out of bed to face the day because I was so stressed out, so full of anxiety, and just thinking, how did I get here? Like, how does this happen? So from there, I fell back to the power of debrief. I fell back to my Navy training and said, okay, well, number one, how did I get myself into this situation? And number two, how do I get myself out? So how did I get myself into it? Well, I was doing what I thought rich people did. I was investing, swinging for the fences. I thought I needed $100 million to be rich. And the reality is, I started studying, I started going to coaching, going to therapy, reading every finance book I could get my hands on. It turns out that rich people actually take a whole lot less risk than we think they do. So we have this hero culture around venture capital, around startup investing. So I thought that's what I needed to do to get $100 million. And it turns out I was ignoring what I learned later is the first rule of the wealthy, which is never lose money. Never lose money that you've already earned is kind of the fundamental principle. And then B, I realized that I was trading the things that actually mattered. I was trading my time, I was sacrificing my health, building this, trying to turn around this failing business when I actually had everything that I needed already to be wildly happy beyond my dreams. I was just sacrificing the present on the altar of success.
You see, I'm listening to you and I agree with you wholeheartedly. But what you're describing there in how you were all these sacrifices you were making to be successful, um, I can also get people on the show who will talk about those things as a badge of honor. I've been divorced 3 times, and they will talk about all the challenges they have, and they work 100 hours a week. Somewhere along the way, as entrepreneurs, and maybe not even entrepreneurs, maybe anyone who wants to grow in life financially, we have this notion that we must step up, we must be macho and make these enormous that's what it's about, that's what it's expected of us, because you became aware. But I think there's lots of people that probably down your road and actually never stopped. They never had that moment of going, hold a sec, what's going on?
Yeah, what are we doing here in the first place? And I think that really was the paradox for me is that I've always been a first principles thinker, right? And so starting from first principles, why did I get into business in the first place? Well, the answer is freedom, right? And so when I speak with entrepreneurs, I have them actually define what wealth is. And typically we start with something having to do with money, but we always wind up on freedom, right? Either they are unemployable, can't imagine having a boss, which was
Mm.
certainly my case. But B, I wanted the freedom to spend my time with the people that I love, doing the things that light me up. And the reality is, most of us need a whole lot less than we think we do in order to live that life, right? So, number one, I think is focusing on what are the things that I want to do. How do I want to spend my time? What brings me joy? What brings me fulfillment? What actually matters to me? And typically, that's focusing on our families, right? Having time to move our bodies and exercise and go on adventures and do the things that bring us joy. And then beyond that, there is this drive, and I think this is what you're hinting at, right? There's this never enough story that is deeply woven into our
Mm.
society that unless we stop and go back to first principles and actually ask the question, what is it that I want? We're just going to accept someone else's default.
So I think that you've hit the nail on the head there. It's this never enough that we feel, and I wonder if, as entrepreneurs, to some degree, we need that, because otherwise we could have just taken a job in the post office. So to some degree, that serves us, but there comes a point where it stops serving. Because if you didn't have that, you would have stayed in the navy or whatever. I mean, you wouldn't have. You'd have been a lifer and then
Totally.
retired in a pension. So something drove you. Is it about finding that place, dialing into understanding this is a value, but I've let it get out of control.
Yeah, you've touched on something really important is that the things that serve us eventually become limitations. And so, growing up in my family, there was 5 kids, and if you wanted to get attention at the dinner table, you better have gotten an A on a test. You better have you won the swim meet or scored a goal in soccer or whatever it is. And um, my parents were wonderful, loving people, but my mom
Mm.
was pretty hard on us, and she expected achievement out of her kids. And again, that served me really well. That built this idea that achievement equals love. If I want to receive love, I better be doing something worthy
Mm.
of admiration. It's a great trauma to
Yeah.
have. It served me very well. It drove me to go to a great school and be in the military and start a company and all of that. But at some point, I was looking outside of myself to feel worthy. right? I was looking for maybe if I just build enough companies, if I just have enough zeros in my bank account, if I just have a cool car, if I just do all of those things, I'll finally receive that validation. I'll finally receive that feeling of enoughness. And the reality is we can only give that to ourselves. And that bottom line, that is only achieved through inner work and truly creating inner wealth, which is uh, both extraordinarily difficult because it requires us to go back into our childhood and to heal the things that perhaps have made us successful. And often, when an entrepreneur comes to me to engage in one-on-one or group work, one of their questions is, "What if I lose my edge?" And my answer to that is, if you do the work of healing yourself, if your edge is fueled by darkness, you may
Mm.
lose that edge. But what you build in its place is something even more powerful. Right? If we can shift from that dirty fuel, that not enoughness that drives so many of us to be successful, if we do that inner healing work, eventually we can repattern our edge to build from a place of service, to build from a place of creation for art's sake, for beauty's sake. And that place becomes a whole lot more sustainable and ultimately more fulfilling.
I think I understand this thing about losing the edge, but I think that's maybe driven from the fact that we don't know anything else. Like we
Yeah.
we have we haven't experienced something else to go, well, I'd rather live this way.
Yeah, definitely. And here's the hard part is that we want certainty. We want to know, okay, if I let go of this striving and not enoughness, it's all going to be good on the other side. And unfortunately, that's just not the way the universe works, right? Certainty is an illusion. We have to at some point step into the void of uncertainty and go, I don't know what's on the other side of all of this. But I'm just going to trust that if I get quiet with myself, if I take the time to invest in my close relationships, invest in myself, invest in my healing, invest in some sort of purpose greater than myself, I'll trust that I'll get there eventually. And that's really the part that requires a leap and is so scary for most people because we just want to cling to that certainty.
So I'm going to guess. I don't know any of your clients, but I'm going to guess two things about your clients. First, probably most of your clients are wealthy people. They're successful. They built businesses. Secondly, most of them are hurting. So that's is that a fair description of your clients?
That
S-
is
So,
that
so
is
what I'm
accurate.
wondering is is there privilege attached to that? So it's funny because you spoke about freedom, and that's something I value enormously is freedom. And I'm privileged, I'm sure you are too, that I now in my life have that freedom. I can get up in the morning and do whatever I want, go wherever I want. I have that freedom. Um, but it is a privilege because I didn't always have that. It's the first thing, and I worked very hard for that. So if the approach I have to life, maybe I've had for the past 10 years or whatever, if this different philosophy of life that I've taken on board now, if maybe that wouldn't have worked for me when I was 30 years of age. So are you reaching your clients at the right time, or would they have benefited from meeting you 10 years ago, or would you not have been the right guy for them?
This is a great question and one that I think about often, right? Like, would I have been able to arrive at
Mm,
these answers at this place without
mm,
the pain? And pain is an
yeah.
amazing teacher. And I think it's important that we separate pain and suffering. So pain is a universal human experience. We don't none of us get out of life alive, right? Even if we have financial abundance, you know, we still lose loved ones. People get sick, we might even
Mm,
lose a pet that we love. Like there's no
mm,
avoiding pain. Suffering on the other hand is the root of all suffering is wishing things for things to be
yeah.
different than they are ultimately. Right. And so we can let go of the attachment to things like, I'll just be happy when, or someday when I finally sell my company, then I'll
Yeah.
have the time to invest in my family, right? Because all that we truly have is now, is the
Mm.
present moment. The past is gone as soon as I finish this sentence. The future is an illusion that only lives inside of our mind. So my work with clients is, how do I let go of the loops that take me out of being present and focus on the moment immediately in front of me? And how do I extract the maximum amount of joy there? And the way that we do that is aligning our actions with our values. So first of all, it's what is it that I actually value? What do I want to wake up and create? Who do I want to impact? And if we can align our actions with our values, then when the inevitable moments of pain come, we actually have something to anchor to and go, hey, I might not be having my best day
Mm.
today, but I know that I am waking up doing work that is serving others and impacting the world in a positive way. And that is where I think the basis of ultimate fulfillment comes from.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting distinction because when you put it that way, I'm rewinding myself back to 30, 35 years of age. And at that point in time in my life, I wouldn't have had the privilege and freedom I had now. I have now. I wasn't there. That's the end of it. But but
Certainly.
my, I'm going to say my misery, my suffering came from not the hard work because I was young. I had three young children. I was up for all that. I was up for building a great life. The problem was I was building something that wasn't aligned on my personal values. And I think that I think that's an important distinction that maybe I hadn't realized now until we started this conversation. So if I go back to the younger me and I had been clear on my values, I may have realized that, Paul, you ain't got much and you want a lot. So you're gonna have to work. But is it aligned with your values? But also, but these things are important as well. You can't go
Yeah.
all in. You can go a lot in, more than you'll want to go in now. But I would have had a different focus and a different understanding.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like, I don't want to rob anybody of
No.
the journey, right? I mean, it's really hard when you're standing on the top of the mountain to tell someone, who's starting their first company, hey, the view from the top of this mountain is empty. Sometimes we have
Yeah.
to find out for ourselves, right? But hopefully along the way, we aren't
Mm.
sacrificing our relationships, right? We aren't emotionally unavailable for the people that care about us. We're not missing our
Mm.
kids' birthdays or their school plays. Like, there is a way to have it all. There truly is, but it's by focusing on, okay, when I think about goals, right? I think goals in general are sort of a problematic idea, because a goal says, if I just reach this end state, then I'll feel the way I want to feel. So instead of setting goals, what I try to I use goals as a vector and go, okay, you know, what if I set this goal and then I work backwards and go, what steps every day would make this
Mm.
goal inevitable? And what would a string of days look like, so that in service of achieving that goal, the goal doesn't even really matter at all, because I've lived such a great life in the meantime that the goal actually becomes irrelevant. And I think, that is sort of the answer, is how do we construct a day and a week and a month that actually serves our
Mm.
values, that's the kind of life that I want to be living, and still doing meaningful work, right? The goal is not to sacrifice your life and then ride
Mm.
off into the sunset. It's like, how do I live in the present and enjoy what I'm doing, and hopefully it's aligned with the person that I want to be.
And I think you can do that at any point in your life. It will be different, as you say, when you get to the top of the mountain than when you're climbing the mountain. It will be different, but you can still align it. And I think what you said there about saying to someone from the top of the mountain, going, "Hey, it it's empty up here. It's an empty chalice." And I think the distinction on that is it can be empty and it will be empty for you if all you do for the next 20 years is exclusively focus on building your business, ultimately trying to fill a lack of self-worth that you were never. Then when you get there, I don't care if it's 100 million or a billion, it will be an empty chasm you cannot fill. But it doesn't have to be. And that's the key.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be an empty place. But um
Yeah. Is the life I've built in the meantime worth worth the outcome. And again, the outcome becomes irrelevant at that
Yeah.
point. If the life that you've built in the process is reward of itself, that's really the goal.
Yes. When we're in your home in Denver, you spoke about wealth, if I remember correctly, wealth being increasing freedom in 5 areas, which I thought so I'd like to speak about that, but it's interesting that you say to me that,
Sure.
ultimately all of the founders you speak to, are pursuing freedom, because I also mix with a lot of, entrepreneurs, and that's what I have come across as well. Even just in casual conversation, the biggest thing they're after is freedom, and the biggest thing they never want to lose is freedom. They could lose everything else, but they won't lose the freedom. So, you talked about several, I think it was 5 areas of freedom.
Yeah. So again, back up to first principles. Asking the question of why do we want money in the first place? Well, money in and of itself doesn't actually make us happy. Money is a store of value. It's a battery, right? So I want to charge that battery and then use that battery to actually build the life that I want. And for me, it's there are 5 pillars which are hierarchical, but they're not sequential, meaning each one of them builds on the other, but we don't have to work on
Mm,
them one at a time. We can work on them all simultaneously. So the foundation of the hierarchy is health. One of my favorite quotes: "A healthy man wishes for many things, but a sick man only wishes for
so
one."
true.
Right. So if we ignore our health, truly, it doesn't matter how much money we have because we have no wealth. Next on that is freedom in the relationships, right? I want to have the freedom to be seen for who I am without being beholden, without having, coercive, controlling type relationships. I want the freedom of expression with the people that I care about. Next is freedom of time. And this is, I think, one of the hardest ones for entrepreneurs to solve because we're constantly in this struggle of trying to figure out how to have enough
Mm.
hours in the day, and money is really useful in helping you buy back your time and decreasing the number of hours that you have to work in order to create the life that you want. From there, the last two are freedom of mind and freedom of soul. So, freedom of mind is, can I hold complex, paradoxical ideas without collapsing? Can I, be challenged? Am I open to new concepts? Am I open minded? Right? Is really ultimate freedom of mind. And then freedom of soul is, am I connected to a purpose higher than myself? Do I feel like I have meaning? And how can I cultivate, not only well-being for myself, but well-being for the other sentient beings on this planet?
When you talk about freedom of time, and you said there that wealth is certainly wealth has the possibility to give you freedom of time, because if if you and I don't have some degree of wealth, then we're not having this podcast, because we're both we're both working away. That's what we're doing. um but your experience probably is this also, but my experience is I know lots of people who fall into the wealth category but don't have the time category. So they have achieved the wealth, and maybe they don't understand how to convert that into free time, or they feel that to maintain the wealth they can't create free time. But my experience is a lot of people with wealth just don't have free time. In fact, someone on a fraction of their wealth has the free time, because they get in at 5 o'clock in the evening and that's it, they're done. They can forget about it till Monday morning. So those two things don't correlate in real life for most people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's because we sort of got the fundamental supposition wrong. Time is our only non-renewable resource, right? We can always get more money. We can never get more time. And so getting really clear on what am I willing to sacrifice in order to get more money, right? I mean, we all start, especially if we're starting from nothing, we do have to trade our
Yeah.
time for money for a while. But at some point, once we've accumulated enough money, now time actually becomes way more important than having enough, right? If my bills are paid, if I can do the things that I want to do, now the question is, how am I going to spend that time? And so many of us never stop to even ask the question, Again, we just accept this default path because that's what everyone else is doing. And here's the thing: society really hates it when we drop out of the game, when we start asking bigger questions, right? Because it makes them question their own choices. So, one of the things I hear often is like, oh my gosh, I could never
Mm.
retire, right? I've got to be busy. Well, why? Why is that? Why do you have this constant need to be busy? Right? What happens? What comes up for you if you start sitting in that stillness? And again, I'm not suggesting that people need to
Mm.
give up and stop working, but I think it's really important to get really quiet and ask yourself, what is this constant drive toward busyness? Where is this coming from? Right? And usually it's feelings of, again, the things we've touched on already: not enoughness, old
Mm.
wounds that are still festering and driving us to never sit still because we actually aren't okay being with
Yeah,
ourselves.
because if we sit still, then those feelings emerge, and it's more comfortable to distract ourselves from those feelings than to actually sit with those feelings and see what's going on. I don't like the word retirement, and the reason I don't is because I imagine, you and I probably both reached points in our lives where we could retire, um, and then chose to do something we wanted to do with our time. So, I mean, I certainly decided how much free time I wanted, and my time is incredibly precious. But I don't wanna sit and I could sit on the beach all day, I don't wanna do that. But I choose to do things that I'm really passionate about doing, and I spend my time on those things. So, I don't see myself ever retiring. What has happened over the years is I've shifted from a point of doing work I didn't want to do for money I needed to a point of doing now I only do stuff I want to do. But I hope that if I live to, 90 years of age, that to some degree, I'm just doing a version of that. There's no version of retirement. Retirement seems to me for people who are doing work they don't want to do.
Yeah, that's it. And I would layer on top of that not just work that they don't want to do, but work that is not connected to a purpose
Mm.
outside of themselves. Right? It's a means to an end, and that is always going to be, ultimately unfulfilling. We can do mental gymnastics all we want to, but ultimately, it's really hard if you are trading your life force, if you're trading your time for something that you don't like doing. It's never going to balance the equation. So for me, first of all, I tell all those people, the entrepreneurs say I can never retire. I say,
Yeah.
try it. Try hanging out and doing nothing for a little
Mm.
while, right? See what comes to the surface. And then once you start going through that healing process, once you start understanding, okay, what is it? What is this latent anxiety that comes up when I'm sitting still? Now we can step into a place of service. And for me, there is no true wealth without service. Right? The day you become truly wealthy is the day you realize it's not about you. And now I am glad to trade my time in serving others because that's where I get my sense of purpose and fulfillment in life. Right? It's really not about me. I could be just off, on the beach riding bikes or doing the things that light me up. And by the way, a lot of those things are really fun
Yeah.
for a while, but ultimately we crave, as humans, we crave connection. We crave connection to something greater than ourselves, to helping others, to purpose beyond us and our immediate uh, needs. And that is the answer that most of the post exit founders that I work with eventually arrive at: is it's nice to have some
Yeah.
space, and then who are we going to serve?
What you've said there is important is that if you never give yourself, you said give yourself the space so that can emerge. If you never give yourself the space, and people going, well, what would I do if I wasn't working, 50, 60 hours a week? And the answer is, well, if you don't stop doing that, the answer you'll never figure that out. It'll never come to you if you give yourself some space. um you'll begin, because I mean, look, I love free time, and it's nice to have time, say, go out on your bike, do whatever, and you can still allocate time to do that. But the reality is, after 2 or 3 months of doing that, you'll be going, that was great. And I'd like to do that on Tuesday and Friday, but I don't want to do that 7 day. I don't want to do that seven days a week. And now what you're seeking is fulfillment. The other interesting exercise you did, sitting in the room with us that morning, was, if I remember correctly, was you asked us all to work out what our number was. I mean, what we needed, every year to live on. It was interesting for me is I knew the answer immediately because I've worked out many years ago. I have two numbers, and I have a number that goes, if I have this number, I can live a really great life for the rest of my days. And the second is, but I'd like this number. So I, but
Yeah.
I worked it out. It was interesting to me how many people around the room were struggling to put to really try and work that out. And it strikes me, and we spoke a lot about kind of, I'm going to say, the soft side of wealth, the understanding the purpose and and the various aspects. But it seems to me that if you haven't defined a goal, you can never achieve it. So if you haven't defined what financial freedom is, then, as you say, I mean, I think it's 100 million. The answer is, sure, have 100 million if you want, but you're financially free a hell of a like you've just made it an Olympic level challenge for you. You need to be able to walk up the mountain. You're going, no, I need to be the fastest man in the world. So I think that was really interesting. I'm wondering how many people you speak to, have never actually thought of that, and how important is it for anyone to sit down, take the time, and really work that out?
Yeah. So, again, going back to what is the point of money and why do we want money? Well, most of us want money because of not money
Mm,
itself, but we want the feeling that we imagine
mm,
money is going to give us, right? The feeling of safety, the feeling of stability, the feeling of knowing that, if my family, a loved one goes in the hospital, I can
mm,
pay those bills. Money is really useful, right? But it's useful in two very specific categories. Number one, I want to close the loops that cause the constant worry, the
mm.
constant stress. And then number two, I want to increase joy and fulfillment. That's money's true purpose. And when viewed from that lens, the first question, okay, is how do I close the loop of worry? Well, it's having enough money so that I can live the life that I want to live, uh, and know that all of those expenses are covered. So for me, I call that escape velocity. So I view freedom, or the number of enough, as three fundamental levels. The first one is 12 months of spending in a liquid account that you can access in 24 hours, right? That's safety. That means that no matter what happens, if I lose my job, if something happens to my business, I don't have to worry about, how I'm going to cover my rent. So if you don't have that, do not pass go. Get 12 months of liquidity in a thing that you can access. Then the next is level two, which is stability, which is 5 to 7 years of spending. And that means now I can weather any economic storm. If we go through another 2008 style recession, I'm good for at least 5 years before I have to earn another dollar. And for most of us, there's no reality that we don't earn a single dollar
Mm.
over a 5 to 7 year period. So now we really have, escaped this
Are
this
you talking
pressure.
this?
And then the
Sorry,
ultimate
just I
level,
want to talk about
yeah.
liquidity here. Are you talking about having that the 12 months is in some sort of a savings account, low rate or something, but you can lay your hands on that. You're talking 5 to 7 years for most people. That's a lot of cash. Are you looking to have that somewhere liquid, or where would you want to see that?
Yeah. So the way I view this is that liquidity is optionality, right? So the point, this low point that I described, my problem was not that I didn't have enough wealth, or financial wealth. It was I couldn't
Couldn't get
access
cash.
any of it. So I was still a multimillionaire
Yeah,
on paper, but I had access in illiquid
yeah.
startups, in real estate, in all kinds of things that I didn't
Mm.
have access to. And by the way, being a multimillionaire on paper is not incredibly useful when you have a
Yeah, it
tax bill
doesn't
to
pay your
pay.
bills.
So at some
And
point,
also,
yes, in
if you
this
if
in
you
this
reach a 2008 level crisis, those things are now going to be even harder to get your money out of.
yeah, exactly. So um, I'm not. I try not to take a
Yeah,
prescriptive approach and tell
yeah.
people what they should do with their money. But my answer is some portion of that needs to
Mm,
be liquid. And for me, it's the
yeah,
lion's share of that needs to be liquid. Like maybe I want to start investing in some real estate, and we can,
yeah.
evaluate the risk, and each person has their own risk tolerance. But for me, if I can't access the money,
So we're
it's not
talking
real money.
index funds or something that you can press a button and turn to cash pretty quickly if you need it.
Yeah, that's the way, because most entrepreneurs already have a tremendous amount of risk in their
Yeah,
primary business. So having that optionality means, because the only way to lose the game of business is to get knocked out. And the only way to get knocked out is
yeah.
to run out of money. I mean, that is the only way businesses fail. And so the more liquidity I have, the more I inoculate myself from that catastrophic failure. So yes, I have a strong preference for liquidity, even as I reach level 2 and then ultimately level 3, which is what I call escape velocity. That's when I have 33 times my annual spending in an asset that generates monthly reliable cash flow so that I never have to draw down on the principal. I mean, that is
Mm.
total financial freedom. That means I never have to work another single day of my life to pay for my life at the desired level. But back to your point, that doesn't mean I ride off into the
Mm.
sunset, right? I can still earn, I can still serve, I can still
Mm.
impact people. So it's not about retirement, it's just becoming work optional. Now I never have to do something I don't want to do in order to pay the
And
bills.
this is, I mean, this comes back to the whole retirement thing and to losing your edge. I think when you get to that point, it's there's a sense of ease to it because now what you have is choice. You don't need to do work. You don't want to do. You don't need to deal with customers. You don't need to deal with none of that is important to you. Um, but now you go, well, what is it? What is it I want to do? How is it I want to spend my time? And you have the freedom to do that. And I suppose then you look around and you see, well, there's lots of other people who are suffering, who are walking the road I was walking X number of years ago, and I could potentially be of service if I was to those people or whatever your choice is. But now you're moving something is going.
Totally.
I mean, to me, it's a quite because I remember I was thinking about doing something a couple of years ago, and I was actually over in Spain, and and spending the days on the beaches, which was lovely. And I was walking up the beach one day and thought, should I go and do this because it will take some of my time? And I would go for a swim. I'd walk up and down the beach, and I thought, okay, am I willing to leave my home in Spain and go and do if I have to go and do this for a couple of weeks, am I willing to leave the home in Spain? I'm willing to go and do this. And my answer was, yeah, I'd love to do that. And that's the that's the trigger for me. If I'm willing to do that, then you go, now you're doing something you would love to do, which is entirely different. But again, I'm conscious that are we talking to the elite because how many people will ever get to that stage? Is it possible for everyone?
Yeah, this is to dive back in on the question of privilege. Yes, it is a
Mm.
tremendous privilege to be in this position, to be able to have time freedom, to be able to have the time to contemplate life's bigger questions. And like, I think we do ourselves a tremendous disservice when we imagine that we don't have
Mm.
advantages that helped us get here, right? And privilege, from a political standpoint, has been sort of weaponized, and we don't need to go down the political road. But the fact is, I was born to a lower middle class family, but when I was starting my business, if it didn't work out, I could still move back
Mm.
in with my parents, right? Not everybody has
Yeah.
that opportunity. So just right there, that is a tremendous privilege, a safety net that a lot of people
Mm.
don't have, right? And I would be totally remiss to not recognize the fact that we are all born with different starting
Yes. Yeah.
hands, right? We still have the responsibility to choose what we're going to do with that starting hand, right? But I think it's the ultimate arrogance to imagine that everyone has the same starting hand, and if I could do it, anybody else could.
I think two things. That one is we have to realize that there's different levels of freedom, and I certainly know people who never made a lot of money but lived life well and are now I'm 60. So and now my age and they have well my mortgage is paid off, my kids are reared and I have a small pension or whatever. And I live a really great life. I don't drive a Lamborghini or fly private, but I'm good. I don't want to, I don't care. But so I think
Yeah.
you can they can have done their they can understand the freedom of wealth and go, well, I'm meeting all these goals. I may not look externally wealthy, but I own they you can be very, very wealthy and not have an enormous amount of money.
I mean, that's look, one of the happiest people I know, a guy that I used to ride bikes with when I lived in San Diego, drives a bicycle repair van a couple days a week to pay his bills, and he spends the rest of his time
Mm,
riding his bike and sailing and enjoying time with
mm,
family and friends. I mean, this is a tremendously wealthy
mm.
man, but he doesn't have a lot of zeros in his bank
Yeah,
account, right? I mean, and essentially, there are really two ways to kind of reach the same goal. First is
yeah,
make more, right? That I mean, profits
yeah.
solve a lot of problems. But the other one is to want
Mm.
less
Live a
and get
simpler
really
life.
clear on, yeah, what is the life that I want to live? And Coco Chanel has a quote that I love, right? I mean, the best things in life are either free or really, really expensive. And so you just have to decide, what are my priorities?
Yeah, and that and by the way, that makes it very achievable for people, and you can use that as a starting point. But the interesting thing, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the day before we arrived at your house, we had spent in Arkansas Valley Correctional Center prison. So I don't know if you were, I mean, you maybe knew that's where we came from the previous day. So
I did, and I've been to
okay,
the
so
same prison, and it is a deeply
it's a
impactful
yeah.
experience.
So you're shaken when you leave it. I mean, it's just it's a powerful experience. It's a very emotional experience, and so we left that day, and from and as we you know you're there for half a day. You deeply connect with these inmates. You really do. You feel a deep connection with these human beings, and some of them
Yeah.
are in there, I'm sure, for awful crimes, and some of them are in there for decades. So we leave and we get back into our two SUVs and we head back into Denver, and and these guys are in their green suits and and the prison guards are there to lock them back up, and some of them are there, and are going to be there for decades, and so it's you're leaving that. It's just really it's really moving. And so the following day we turn up to your beautiful home looking over the mountains, and so it was like we went from one extreme to an to because they are both extremes. Extreme privilege. I hope you don't take offense for that comment, but that's it. We went to an example of a very
Yes.
privileged lifestyle to a complete lack of privilege, and so over the next, I suppose it fades a God thing, but over the rest of our trip around Denver, we referred everything back to that. If your fries arrived cold or something, you're going, I have my freedom. So there's a starting point for everything.
Yeah, and look, I love this conversation because it's easy for those like you and I who have a tremendous amount of privilege to say, well, if you don't want to go to prison, don't
Yes.
commit crimes. When you connect, and the word you use, right,
Mm,
human beings, when you actually connect with the people that have lived that life, you see one eventual truth at the end of it all, which is they're not that
mm,
different from you or I, right? The vast, vast majority of incarcerated people came from very financially poor backgrounds, right?
mm.
That is unequivocally, correlated truth, right? We did not get dealt the same starting hand. And again, it's the height of arrogance to imagine, well, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't have committed crime. The world does not operate in black or white, right? It is a very gray area. And when you connect with these people, you hear their stories, you know, it's deeply moving because we realize truly the line is not that the gap is not that big.
And that's exactly what we experienced there was my sense of that had I they did not grow up in my home with loving parents who took care of me, all these sort of things. As you know, not that we were tremendously wealthy people, but I could go back and sleep in a bed. I would have food on the table. I wasn't going to be in the street if I messed my life up. But these were growing up in often with you know prostitution, drugs, violence, gangs, all this in their family. And my sense was, had I grown up there, the odds are I'd be standing on that side of the line in a prison suit. And I I think it's a powerful experience for anyone because we started this conversation or early on talking about freedom, about we all entrepreneurs are pursuing wealth because we want freedom. When you visit the prison, you realize, okay, you're talking to your ass because this lack of freedom, by the way, this is what it looks like. One thing struck me simple. I talk about their green suits because it did strike me. Um, if you were given this green suit and you're told this is what you have to wear, you'll be here for the next 25 years, and every morning you'll get up and you'll put this on. You even that alone for any of us to go, you have to wear the same suit of clothes, and yet we all go about building wealth in this in with this fantasy of freedom that we haven't completely clarified and understood. And then I think what our experience is most people never get the freedom. So I'm trying to bring this back to a point of
Yep.
to a starting point for anyone listening to this. um, and the starting point seems to be first clarifying what you really want, what's the life you want to create, and what it's going to take for you to do that. And then if you want to go beyond that, knock yourself out, but understand where your freedom point lies. So, and the other exercise we did was you asked everyone to talk about what their ideal day, week, year was, and then you asked everyone how close were they financially to that. I think everyone said they were there. And the reason they were there is not because, oh, this is a room of multimillionaires. It was because most of what's important to them is free.
Yeah, I mean, this is an exercise that I do with everyone that I work with. Is let's get really clear. Like you said, this concept of freedom, all of this is kind of fuzzy. Let's get really clear and define this thing. Let's map
Mhm.
out our perfect day. Let's map out our perfect week. And you're exactly right. What happens is, again, I'm working mostly with entrepreneurs who have created
Mhm.
some level of financial success. People get to the end of the exercise. I have them add up how much does that life cost, and most everybody either says, I'm there or within
Yeah.
striking distance of living this
Mm.
ideal life, which means that the only limitation
Yeah.
is you, right? Like you said, we all have the ability to make changes to increase the joy and fulfillment in the present moment that don't require any
Mm.
more money. Right now, if my dream life is having 17 vacation homes, like you said, okay,
Mm.
good on you.
Mm.
Go do that. Right. But what is it you're trying to create? Like, what do you think those 17 vacation homes are going to give you? Quality time with your family? Well, guess what? You have that
Yeah.
ability
Yeah.
today, right now, wherever you're living. You can take your kid, go down and go fishing or whatever it is. Like, you have the ability to do that. You don't need a
Mm.
17 vacation home in order to do
Yeah,
these
I
things.
was asked recently. Well, it could have been one of our EO events. You know, I don't know what was the best gift you ever received or something. And I said, and I remembered very, very, very simply what the best gift I'd ever received, and maybe just because it was a surprise, but the surprise was for me last year. My wife said, "Will we go?" I have three adult sons. Two of them live in nearby in Ireland. One of them lives in London. And she said, "Will we go over and visit Sam in London for the weekend?" And I said, "That's a beautiful way to spend a weekend." So we flew over and we spent the weekend. We said we'd go for dinner, and himself and his partner, etc. And that was great. So we met them for dinner on Friday night, and on the Saturday morning, she said, "Hey, we're going to hook up with them about lunchtime. We might go for a bit of lunch or blah blah blah." I said, "That's cool. We're staying for the weekend." And as we rambled down the road, my son came walking up the road and he said, "Hey, we're going to go down to this pub in here, but it seems quite busy." And I said, "Maybe we go somewhere else." He goes, "No, no, no, no. We're going to go down here. We're going to go down here." Okay, walk in, and my wife had flown my other two sons and their partners over. So I had my entire family there for the day, and she said it was just kind of a mad thing. I just flew them all over to London for the day. Now the reality of it was that she had thought of this about 6 months earlier, and it didn't cost an enormous amount to fly from Dublin to London. So it's something anything could have done, but to me, it was just such a way to spend the thing. I mean, really, life is about the simplest things, and when we realize that, we realize we probably have everything. Mike, where can people find you?
Yeah. So, unbreakablewealth.com is my website. You can sign up for my newsletter. I write long form weekly newsletter about what makes a rich life. Twitter, M Brown underscore underscore co, M Brown underscore co, and same thing on Instagram. I'm active on both of those places, but my newsletter is definitely the place I love to send people. I spend a lot of time and effort thinking deeply and putting my thoughts down there. So that's where I'd love
I'll
you guys
put
to
that in the
have
show notes.
come
And
check
you
me
have a
out.
podcast also?
I do have a podcast called Money Stories, where I talk with successful founders about money, meaning, and what makes a rich life. Uh, we talk about switching from that dirty fuel to clean fuel, and what truly lights them up. And it turns out a lot of people have had these
Mm.
similar journeys, and so it's really an honor to be able to share those stories
Well,
with
no
the
doubt
world.
if someone has enjoyed this conversation, they'll enjoy the podcast. I will put all this in the show notes. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I hope the audience got half as much out of it as I did. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure, and it was so nice hosting you guys here in my home. And now I have to return the favor and come drop in
You
back to
have to.
Ireland.
Thank you so much.